Hello everyone, this is Ben, and in this video we're going to talk about the Kalaam cosmological argument for the existence of God. Again, I've talked about it on my channel many times before. The reason I am doing so at this point is because in my personal studies I've just it's come back around. It's time for me to take a look at arguments for the existence of God, and every time we go around this road, it's on my mind, and so I started, looking at other stuff outside of my routine study, and I start looking at other stuff related to it, and it's on my mind, and so we're going to talk about it again. What I find is that as I go through these, I get better and better at talking about it, and so making the case for God's existence using the Kalaam cosmological argument. One of the more interesting things I've learned recently is sort of the history of this argument, but let's just kind of lay out the history here. There's actually an interesting list of philosophers who've worked on this argument and strengthened it. And the original, the first work was done by Christians. The most notable Christian philosopher was named John Philoponus. So let's look up when John. I should have. Philoponus, Greek Christian living in Alexandria, Egypt. Okay, so 490 to 570. So John the Grammarian, or John of Alexandria, Byzantine Greek. This is the Eastern Roman Empire. This is after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. This is in the very early Middle Ages. Okay, the 500s. This is, way on back. And these Greek Christians had picked up Aristotle's, who lived about 1,000 years before, arguments. Well, not quite 1,000, but Aristotle's arguments for I'm scratching my foot, for the eternality of the universe. So Aristotle and Plato were like the dominant guys who their views were the prevailing views. And Aristotle thought it was ridiculous to think that the universe had not existed forever. All of the Greek schools of thought were dedicated to cyclical time. In other words, that everything that's happened will happen again. Time moves in circles. So all of the Greek philosophical schools were dedicated to this. And in general, the view in the Greek philosophical schools was in line with Aristotle's view, that the universe has always existed. I mean, there might have been some schools of thought that thought it would ultimately be destroyed and then come back over and over again. But the material, concrete stuff that makes up the universe is eternal and cannot come into being or go out of being. Okay. Christians always butted heads with the pagan Romans and Greeks over this. And eventually, when the Greek and Roman world is now Christian, there's still conflict over this. And Christians always put their foot down that no, God created everything. That the creation did not always exist, but rather the creation was created. Aha. Okay, so, and the first work was done by these Christians, John Philoponus being sort of the lead guy at these philosophical schools in Alexandria, Egypt. Muhammad comes along in the 600s, and then you have later Muslim theologians who, especially Al-Ghazali, who really puts this argument in a good syllogism, and he actually he makes some good arguments to. Well, here's his syllogism. It works like this. His syllogism is everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore, the universe has a cause of its existence. Now, this idea, this was pretty radical at the time. I mean, people like Thomas Aquinas refused to accept it and argue for God's existence on the assumption that the universe had always been there. but not Al-Ghazali. And in my laying out of this argument, I'm just going to, from Al-Ghazali, I'm just going to pull some stuff at the end there, because what you do at the end of the argument is then you say, okay, well, this cause of the universe exists and cause the universe to begin to exist. And then you start to ask questions like, well, what sort of thing would a cause of the universe be? And that's where I'm going to borrow from Al-Ghazali, because he makes an argument there that there is a personhood, that the cause of the universe is not a thing but a person. It's an immensely powerful, timeless being. Okay, God. Okay, so what we're going to do, we got everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause of its existence. What we're going to do is go through each of those. We got two premises and a conclusion. Now, it's obvious that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Okay? But what we're going to do is look at arguments, two arguments each for, well, two main arguments, I guess, for each of the premises. And then we're going to look at Al-Ghazali's argument, where he basically argues that this cause of the universe would be a personal being, But, so, when it comes to that first premise, we'll just start with the first premise. Everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. And William Lane Craig likes to use three arguments to back it up. I'm just going to do two for the sake of this video. He offers three to support this, though. His first argument to support this is not much of an argument. He just says this is just a basic metaphysical intuition that as the Greeks put it like this, only nothing comes from nothing. It's hard to imagine something coming into existence without a cause. It just seems sort of intuitively impossible. Now, the reason I don't make that argument much is because I can see how it just seems like you're just saying you're right. And the thing is, a basic intuition is something you don't offer an argument for. Like, a basic intuition is, in philosophy, that just means like 1 + 1 = 2. Like, you don't really make an argument to back that up. It just obviously, in philosophy, intuition means something that you are directly connected with. So, like, I forget, aware of. A mental observation or a literal observation. Like, if I see a screwdriver on the desk in front of me, there is a red screwdriver, then that's in philosophy, that's called an intuition. And so that's what Craig's saying there. And he's not the only one saying that. That is just one of the most, it's a classic view of philosophy throughout the millennia. No one's ever really run afoul of it. You hear people want to throw it away because it becomes key in this argument for God's existence, and you got people who don't want to accept God's existence. But in general, people don't. It just seems sort of obviously true. Okay. Now, Arthur Pryor's argument is a second argument for the first premise, and I've made it before, but I'm going to try to do a little bit better job today talking about this argument. And this is a philosopher by the name of Arthur Pryor. I don't know much about him other than that's the name of the guy. And his argument is essentially, can be summed up with just asking a question. Why only universes? Or really, he says it becomes inexplicable, or it becomes impossible to explain why only universes can come into being without a cause, come into existence without a cause. Why can't other things come into existence without a cause? Sometimes people misunderstand this argument, and they think that it is like it's like science, it's like a law of science. And it's not really a scientific argument, So, like, In other words, we don't observe things scientifically in our scientific observations coming into being without a cause. We don't observe that. But, and it's easy to think that, like, well, this is a scientific argument that Arthur Pryor is making here. Why, when he asks why only universes, why don't we observe, bunny rabbits popping into existence and pink unicorns popping into existence and Superman and all kinds of things that aren't known to exist? Why, that's not really, it's easy to fall in the trap of thinking this is like a science argument, because science deals with what we observe regularities. Like, if you take a gas and put it into a container and then you heat it up, the pressure will increase. And we can measure that relationship of how much heat and how much pressure increase, depending on what gas it is. That's science observes regularities and then formulates laws that describe the relationships that we observe between things. And then scientific theories come in to try to explain why those relationships exist. Okay. So, the thing is, it's easy to fall in the trap of thinking this is like a scientific argument, and, we've never observed it happening, but maybe one day we will, or maybe it has happened in the past and we forgot, or maybe it happens elsewhere, or maybe, it goes on all the time microscopically and we just don't know, we never see it, And that's a mistake. That's not really Arthur Pryor's argument. What he's saying is, you can't possibly explain why it would only be universes. So, a lot of absurdities would result. This is his argument, that things could happen and, all kinds of absurdities. Well, essentially, we'll just leave it at that, what he says. Why can't, a unicorn pop into existence in your bedroom right now and go number 2 on your bed? Do you really think that that's possible? And it gets at this, what this argument does, it says, okay, maybe you don't have the metaphysical intuition that only nothing comes from nothing, but you seem to feel real confident that, that can't happen. And I've never heard anyone think that the unicorn could come into existence like that. It's more of just this metaphysical intuition. It can't happen for no reason at all, But people, I've heard objections to this Arthur Pryor argument more than one time, the why only universes argument. And I've heard the same objection, that the universe has rules such that nothing can come into being without a cause inside of the universe. So that the universe came into being without a cause, but now that the universe is here, then it has rules that, its essential properties that make it what it is, just bans that. Okay? Which seems kind of ad hoc. Ad hoc is when you keep changing your view so that no one can invalidate it, and every time somebody comes up with a flaw in your view, you adjust it just enough to get past the flaw, and eventually it gets to the point where I don't think your view really carries much weight. Maybe you should just drop it, because it's like a piece of metal that's been bent so many times that it's fallen apart. I'm about to turn the fan on right quick. But anyway, that's Arthur Pryor's argument. So, here's the thing. This is what I'm gonna do is add my argument that I've made before in at this point, because what I notice when people say this is there's a connection here. Essentially, what they're doing is they are saying that the universe becomes this immovable object, and it becomes the old Greek question of the unstoppable force and the immovable object the Greek philosophers wondered about. What happens when the unstoppable force meets the immovable object? It's a classic philosophical question. And the conclusion of philosophers is that they can't meet. It would be a metaphysical impossibility if they were to meet. And so a metaphysical impossibility, there is a distinction between a metaphysical impossibility and a logical impossibility. So like it's logically impossible for a married bachelor to exist, or for a pregnant and unpregnant woman to exist, or for there to be 2 cats outside the door and 0 cats outside the door. Those are all, those are all logically impossible, because the basic idea that defines what the situation is contradicts itself, and therefore it can't possibly be true, because there is no idea really. It's a meaningless concept. That's logically impossible. Metaphysically impossible, essentially, it can mean a lot of things, but one of the things it can mean is that this may be logically possible, but if this thing was to exist, then other logical impossibilities would have to be possible. And since those other logical impossibilities cannot be possible, then this thing can't exist. It's metaphysically impossible, but it's not logically impossible. Logical impossibility is stronger, but it's what makes something metaphysically impossible in this situation that we're talking about. And metaphysics is just the study of existence, just of reality in philosophy. And physics is basically a sub-branch. The science of physics is a sub-branch of metaphysics, and where you make certain metaphysical assumptions and then go about doing your scientific research. So as a physicist, you just assume that the external world is real and that that observations in general are reliable, that we can trust our basic senses, and you just you assume that mathematics is reliable. As a physicist, you let the mathematicians worry about proving that mathematics works. You let the philosophers worry about the metaphysics of does the external world exist, and stuff like that. The reality of the past. A good example is the uniformity principle. That it's a basic assumption in science that if we observe something a bunch of times, then we can go ahead and say that that's a law about how things work. Well, you can't prove that by making a lot of observations, but there are philosophical arguments to back that up. They do. Some of the best ones rely on God's existence, but that's not important right now. So the thing about the Greek concept of an unstoppable force and an immovable object is that there's nothing logically incoherent about an immovable object or unstoppable force. God is an immovable object. God is an unstoppable force. There's nothing logically incoherent with God's existence. But the thing is, when you have 2 all-powerful gods who are at war with each other, then you have a problem. So one of the things existing is not a problem. The other thing existing is not a problem. But if you were to allow them to exist and, not necessarily, be friends, then you would have a problem. So then this logically impossible thing would occur where, when the unstoppable force meets the immovable object, which one of them wins? Both of them have to win. Okay. My point is that when people make this argument and they say, well, once the universe comes into existence, then it has rules such that nothing can pop into existence without a cause inside of it. That sounds to me a whole lot like an immovable object. It's like there's this wall that's been created, and it's a metaphysical wall, because it all of a sudden, it's not a physical rule for the universe. No, it's like a rule that now, I can't be altered in this way. In other words, it's just part of the identity of what that universe is. Like, it's not a scientific law that like says, we've observed this a bunch of times, so it's true. No, it is part of the essence, the essential properties of that universe, which we can't ever really prove scientifically. Okay. So I started thinking, I was like, this is how this argument for me, if you give the history of it, I was like, no, wait a minute, like, that sounds, that smells familiar to me. That smells like the old immovable object. And then it was like, okay, well, what if a bunny rabbit popped into existence inside this quote-unquote universe that has rules where that can't happen? That's really the question that I'm asking. What about this bunny rabbit? Another question I would ask is, like, okay, so the universe has those rules. What if those rules become altered without a cause? Why can't they be altered without a cause? And then we're right back to Arthur Pryor's argument. Or this universe could just be caused to cease to exist without a cause, and then another universe could pop into existence without a cause that has the other properties. And we all exist in it as though nothing happened. I don't know. And so then we're just right back to the situation. That's what Arthur Pryor's question is, like, why don't things pop into existence all the time? It becomes inexplicable why they don't. Because things happen for no reason. And you say, well, no, that doesn't happen. Well, why doesn't that happen? There cannot be an explanation for why that happens. Because when something pops into existence without a cause, that is without explanation. There's, in other words, nothing is the easiest thing to explain, given that it's nothing. So you've got nothing to explain. So, like, there is no explanation for why something would happen without a cause. That is essentially something happening without an explanation for why it happened. There is no explanation for why something happened without a cause. And so it does truly become inexplicable. And sometimes I think people recognize this metaphysical intuition like better than the other one. I do think it's a metaphysical intuition. It really raises real questions, like, about probability assessments. Like, what are the odds that, like, say your car doesn't start? What are the odds that, like, some glue popped into existence inside your fuel lines for no reason at all? I don't know. And what if some sort of solvent that dissolves the glue and a hole in the fuel lines that, like, evaporates it away, pops into existence for no reason at all, right before you go to check the fuel lines, and then a new fuel line replaces the fuel line so that there's no hole in it, there's no evidence that any of that took place, and all that happens for no reason at all. What are the odds that that happens? What are the odds that that's why your car wouldn't start? Well, you can't lay a probability assessment on things happening for no reason at all. If things can pop into existence for no reason at all, it genuinely becomes inexplicable why that doesn't happen all the time. Or any time that it doesn't happen, there is no explanation for why it didn't, I guess. So that's kind of the point. So my argument is that an unstoppable force and an immovable object could come into existence, because I was just like, now wait a minute, the way people are responding to Arthur Pryor's argument, they're just saying, like, well, the universe has rules such that it can't happen again, and only that's why only the universe can pop into existence for no reason at all. And I was like, well, what if another universe popped into existence right next to ours that we can't see, and it had other rules that that, make it where it can violate the rules of the previous universe, you know what I mean, like, and then it can and alter the rules of the previous universe. It's a universe rule altering machine, you know what I mean? It alters the metaphysical rules of the universes, you know what I mean? Like, it just seems like these absurdities would have to be possible as soon as you allow that things can happen for no reason at all, or you just say things can't happen for no reason at all. But if things can happen for no reason at all, if universes and things can come into existence for no reason at all, then you've all these absurdities become an issue. And when I say happen, there is a distinction to be made between events occurring for no reason at all and an actual substantial concrete thing popping into existence for no reason at all. But for our purposes, I'm just using the language interchangeably for today. But like, because it's not really that big of an issue for us. But like the one way to think of the argument that I'm making is like, okay, a literal, forget about the universe, a literal unstoppable force and a literal immovable object could have popped into existence, and there's nothing logically incoherent about their existing. The problem is when they meet. As long as they never meet, it's not a problem. As long as there's only one of them, there's not a problem. But it's a metaphysical problem, because if they existed, then these other logical absurdities would suddenly have to become possible, because now they exist. And so that's the problem there. And that would have to be possible, but it can't be. And so everything that begins to exist does in fact have a cause of its existence. I think the first premise of the Kalaam cosmological argument is as solid as you would want out of a premise in a philosophical argument. Let me see if I can sum up the case for the first premise of the Kalaam cosmological argument. Imagine that a bunny rabbit appeared out of nothing, without a cause, for no reason at all, and just popped into existence in the room you're in right now, whether it's your living room, your bedroom, whatever. Just popped into existence without a cause right now. We have a tendency to think of that and visualize that in the way that we've seen it in like movies and cartoons and stuff, where there's like a wizard or something, or a witch that says some funny words and waves her hands around, and then voila, a bunny rabbit appears. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about something coming into existence without a cause or causelessly. In those TV shows and movies and cartoons, like, that's magic. Magic is an unseen cause. It's something that's causing the bunny rabbit to come out of the hat, as it were. And the cause of that is unseen. The magic is unseen, but there's something going on in the world that we don't understand. That is nowhere near the same thing as the bunny rabbit coming into existence for literally no reason at all. As the Greeks said, only nothing comes from nothing. Okay? And it's a basic metaphysical intuition, but we have to kind of contemplate it to see it. Now, Arthur Ryland backs this up, and he says, there is no way to explain why it was a bunny rabbit and not, for example, a kangaroo, or a pink Cadillac, or Superman, or a 12-pack of Coke. There can be no explanation. Metaphysically, even if you can't see that it can't happen, you must be able to see that, it's inexplicable. There can be no explanation. Because nothing has no properties. Because it's just nothing. So, it has no properties that make it specifically cause bunny rabbits to pop into existence, as opposed to, all these other things, like a kangaroo. So, there can never be an explanation for why it was a bunny rabbit and not a kangaroo. And there can never be an explanation for why it doesn't happen all the time. And then what I would add to this is there can be no explanation for why an unstoppable force and an immovable object can't appear, and there's nothing wrong with them intrinsically, but if they could appear, then they could collide, and they can't. It's logically impossible for them to collide, and so, but there's nothing wrong with them existing, on their own, as long as they don't collide. And so, this becomes a real problem. Like people say, oh, well, the universe it came to existence out of nothing, uncaused. And honestly, for the sake of rationality, shouldn't you prefer God creating the universe than just nothing? Because like if the universe could pop into existence that way, then sometimes atheists argue like, well, it has rules now that prevent anything, and this is just a problem.